Be bold. Be heard. Welcome to Unmute Your Mic with your host, Jessica Bell. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Unmute Your Mic.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. My name is Jessica Bell. I am your host from Kansas City, Missouri. And today I have Natalie with me. I'm so excited for you all to hear her story, hear this topic that she is going to talk about today. I think it's very important. I think it's very needed. And so, Natalie, if you could just introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you so we can get this conversation started.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Jessica. I'm Natalie Vecchione. I am a mom of two amazing kids, both of whom were blessed to my husband and I through domestic adoption. Our son is almost 19 years old, and we have a closed adoption. We really didn't know much about him or his birth family. And then our daughter is almost 6 years old, and we have a very open adoption. We actually knew her birth mom and her birth mom's family for quite a few years. So we have two very different adoption journeys. Our son has a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or an FASD. And we had a verbal a doctor had told us that he suspected it when our son was about 2, that our son had prenatal alcohol exposure. However, we did not get a written official diagnosis until he was 15, almost 13 years later. So we spent all that time trying to bring it up, to educators, to therapists, to doctors, professionals, specialists. And we finally had the confirmation when he was 15. So it was a long journey. And part of that journey, actually, all of that journey inspired us to start up our podcast, which is called FASD Hope, and our website, and what my husband and I consider to be our ministry, which is FASD Hope, and being there for other parents, other caregivers, other families that have a child, a loved one that has a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, providing awareness about FASD. FASD is the most common developmental disability in the Western world. A recent study by Dr. Philip May of UNC Chapel Hill in 2018. This study was published in JAMA. Estimates that 1 in 20 kids have been exposed to alcohol prenatally. So it's much more common than people think. We also want to provide awareness about there's more than one diagnosis in FASD. FASD is considered an umbrella spectrum. So it looks different in every person. It looks different in every child, similar to autism and the autism spectrum. In fact, many kids that have an FASD are often misdiagnosed with either autism or ADHD because the symptoms present so similarly. And when you find out about the prenatal alcohol exposure, then you know that it's actually brain damage and not a genetic type of diagnosis like autism or ADHD. So we want to provide awareness. We want to provide resources. My husband and I, we have over 18 years of lived experience as parents of a son with an FASD. We don't consider ourselves to be professionals by any means. We don't consider ourselves to be experts. We do consider ourselves to be parents with a lot of lived experience. And from our personal experiences, the parents who tell us, these great nuggets of information about, this particular practitioner or this particular book or something are the ones that we have found to be most valuable. So we want to let parents know that they're not alone on this journey, that we're on this journey. We continue to be on this journey. And finally, the third prong of our mission is to bring hope and inspiration. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, often you don't hear the word hope along with it. The statistics are they're sobering, no pun intended, but they're very, the statistics can be very shocking. Studies have shown that the average lifespan of an individual that has an FASD is 34 years old. Studies have also shown that there's a high amount of adults that have an FASD that have either been incarcerated, they're addicted themselves, they're in gangs, they're homeless, because the brain-based disability was not acknowledged and accommodated. So the earlier you can get a diagnosis, and the earlier you can, as parents, see what FASD is, which is a brain-based physical disability. It has over 400 medical conditions related to FASD. So it's not just a brain, it's a brain-based disability, but it affects the whole body. The alcohol, it's a teratogen, and it crosses the placenta, and it damages not only the central nervous system, but other organs, that are developing in the unborn child. So all of those statistics are very stark. And so we want to change the conversation that, yes, those are statistics, and yes, without accommodations and without the proper treatment and without learning about how FASD is, those statistics are real. But we want to provide hope. We're not a success story. We're just a journey that's still in progress. We don't consider ourselves to be success. We consider ourselves to be very blessed that we learned about our son's condition, albeit when he was 15, we still had a final, definitive diagnosis. And then my husband and I were able to receive training. We were able to educate ourselves. We were able to make accommodations for our family and in our lifestyle that have helped our son tremendously. So those are the three things we really want to do with FASD and Hope, is to provide awareness, to provide resources, and to share stories of inspiration and hope.
Wow. Okay. So you said a lot there, and I have so many questions, but it's a good
Sure.
thing because I have so many questions. A little bit about me. I actually work in youth development. And so
Oh my goodness.
I work in youth development. I'm a teacher. I've worked with children who have been incarcerated and in juvenile detention centers as well. And what's eye-opening, but also very sad, is that I haven't really had a lot or
any training
on this. And so many times it's like they immediately want to just say the child is on the spectrum, or they've got ADD or ADHD or something like that. And even doing trauma informed care, I'm literally licensed in that, and we've had very few talks about
fetal alcohol. Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing.
Most people also focus on the illicit or illegal substance abuse, thinking that that's worse. And it's actually not true. You'll see the withdrawals and the neonatal abstinence, kind of things. And those are very dramatic. However, with fetal alcohol, it's lifelong. It's a damage that you can't see, and it's never mentioned. And I think a lot of it is because we either assume somebody did not drink during pregnancy, or we forget to ask, or we don't research it, I think this conversation was totally meant to be, because I have met through FASD Hope and through my parent advocacy, I've met a lot of professionals who want to learn about FASD. So that gives me hope as a parent. So I am so thankful that you want to learn about this, and hopefully share this, with your professionals and with the people you work with, because once you know the science behind prenatal alcohol exposure, then you understand that no, these are not willful behaviors. These are actually symptoms. Or no, this kid it's not that he or she doesn't want to do something. It's because their brain can't actually do it. And most importantly, that there's a big gap that doesn't it happens in other diagnoses, but not as much as FASD. There's a big gap between a person's chronological age and their developmental age. It's a huge gap. It's present in other brain-based diagnoses, but it's not as big as FASD, because as children with FASD, and there's different diagnoses under that umbrella, as they age and get older, the world expects more of them. And because of the executive functioning deficits, they can't meet up to that challenge because their brain can't do that. And that's one of the biggest areas of impairment besides memory, cognitive impairment is that's one of the biggest areas of impairment is executive functioning, being able to carry out a task, being able to say, tell somebody, okay, can you do this 3-step task? And their brain only remembers maybe one of those steps. So, yeah, I am thankful I'm talking with you because so many people just really need to hear this conversation.
They definitely do. And it really just makes you think, because I love how you said, the world is expecting things of them that maybe they are not able to fulfill. And sometimes on the outside looking in, you're thinking, what's wrong with this person? Like,
Right.
and sometimes you think it's intentional. Like, oh, and I've learned that working with children, it's like this child just can't behave no matter what we do.
Yeah.
Like, and you just like, what's wrong with them? And you think maybe punishing them more will help,
Yep.
or taking away their favorite toy. And if they
Mm-hmm.
cannot control it, if it is something that has happened to them that they literally,
Their
they
brain can't do it.
yeah, they can't do, then it doesn't matter what you do. And
Mm-hmm.
what's kind of sad about that as well is that when people are not educated in that, myself included, and when you're dealing with people who are youth who are in the juvenile detention system, and you
Yeah.
just want to kind of write them off as lost souls who just don't are
Yeah.
misguided, and they really, what they need is help.
They
And
need a
so
better fit. They need accommodations. And we wouldn't punish somebody who had a mobile, we wouldn't punish somebody who was not able to walk because of their disability. We wouldn't punish somebody who's not able to see because of their disability. FASD, the facial characteristics that are associated with fetal alcohol exposure are only present in 10% of cases of FASD. So 90% of cases of FASD, this is science. This is, I can give you, the research, that shares this. 90% of people that have prenatal exposure have no outward symptoms. So it's an invisible disability. And by punishing it, by taking away things, like our son, when he was in regular school, we've been a homeschool family for 7 years, and he's graduated from homeschool, and he's a carpentry apprentice, and he's studying computers part-time. But when he was in regular school, often he was punished, either taken resource rest away or other things for his symptoms, which were things like the primary characteristics were things like impulsivity, not being able to follow directions, distractibility, sensory issues, executive functioning deficits, not understanding. And here's something I know you can relate to with the youth you work with, not understanding that actions have consequences. That's a huge, huge hallmark of FASD. And so that's why there's so much recidivism, especially in juvenile detention and then in adult detention, because, something happens and their brain cannot understand that consequence. So that is huge. So again, I'm glad to be talking with you. I think this is a conversation that was meant to happen.
it definitely was. And so I wanted to ask you, when you are working with a child, like if you're working with children who are maybe in group homes or in foster homes, and you have no idea who their parents were, where they came from, how is this something that can start to get diagnosed? Because like you said, what you're saying sounds so much like children that maybe I have worked with that have been on the spectrum, or children that have endured a lot of trauma in their life.
Yeah.
And so how do you start to really work through that and say, how do we figure out exactly what this diagnosis is so that we can better help them?
So the first thing is that there's hope on the horizon that there actually, pre-COVID, there was legislation, national legislation, that was being introduced to, it was FASD legislation. It was called the FASD, the Advancing Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders Research, Prevention, and Services Act. It was on hold during COVID. However, now it's in the process of getting momentum, being reintroduced. There are legislative sponsors. I'm part of a parent advocate team of NOFAS, which is the National Organization for Fetal Alcohol, and we're trying to get that passed. So if you can reach nofas.org to find out how you can help with this legislation. It's wonderful legislation that will help with research, prevention, and support. So that's the first thing you can do is you can, if you're out there listening or watching, you can get on that bandwagon to say, yes, we need support. We need this to be a national legislation. So the first thing I would do is take advantage. And since COVID, this has become much more accessible. If you're a professional out there or a parent or anyone who's listening to me and you suspect anyone may have an FASD, first of all, learn about it. So there are organizations. The organization we did our training through is called FASCETS, FASCETS.org. And they provide online, now it's online, they provide online trainings for anyone who wants to learn about FASD, prenatal alcohol, and not just FASD, but brain-based diagnoses in general, because kids in other diagnoses also get these repercussions too. So it's important to recognize, yes, definitely FASD, but it happens with other diagnoses. So that's the first thing I would recommend is find out where you can get training. There's also wonderful, if you're not able to do like a big training, there's also just courses. I know for example, I'm friendly with the woman who runs Indiana NOFAS, which is an affiliate, and she provides these wonderful, every month she provides these 1 hour, she calls them lunch break classes, where you can learn, like it's almost like an introduction to FASD. And it's very inexpensive, and you get a continuing education unit for participating in the classes. So I can give you that resource. So that's an example of the many different online education opportunities that you can do. So I would get educated. Another great way to learn about FASD is, I'm going to recommend this book. It's called Trying Differently Rather Than Harder, and it's by Diane Malvin. And it was the first book I read as a parent that taught me about FASD and how it's a brain-based disability and how it affects and how we need to make accommodations. And the training that I took is actually based on the book. So it's a wonderful book. It's not a long book. It's a short read, but it makes it tangible. It makes you understand the science behind prenatal alcohol exposure. So that's the first step. Second step is always rule FASD out. If you suspect anything that looks like it, get a diagnosis. So what that means is, if that youth is, in detention, find a clinician, find a specialist that can do an FASD screening. And it's not just going to be like a typical psychological screening. There's a lot involved. There's a neuropsychological screening, adaptive functioning screening. There's other components involved in that screening. But where I recommend for people to look for, so for example, you're in Kansas City, Missouri, there are state chapters of FASD organizations. You can go on to nofas.org, or you can even Google, Missouri FASD or something. And that's one of the things that our website provides is we're constantly updating it, but there are organizations where you can say, okay, you're living in this area. Here's some resources available in that area. So if you contact a state organization, and a lot of them, some of them are have been in existence for very long, so they can really give you good resources. There are wonderful clinics out there, so if you're talking about a child who's not in the system yet, but keeps, like you said, that bounce back, that recidivism is happening, try to find a clinic, try to find a specialist, somebody who is FASD aware and who can provide that diagnosis. So that's the second component. A great example I will give is Minnesota. So Minnesota, what was formerly known as Minnesota Organization of Fetal Alcohol, is now called Proof Alliance, and it's proofalliance.org. They not only are huge in Minnesota, but they, especially since COVID, really have an outreach not only nationally but globally. They're really a forerunner in FASD. And one of the recent legislation that was just passed, which we in the FASD community, we're so excited about this. We would love to see this in every state. And it's just a tip of the iceberg, but it's a really great legislation. So in August, legislation was passed in Minnesota, and I spoke with Susan Shepherd Carlson, who is the former First Lady of Minnesota. She was huge in working with Proof and getting this legislation passed, and she's actually huge in hopefully getting this national legislation momentum. So shout out to Susan Shepherd Carlson. She's one of my heroes. What Minnesota did and what is now law is that, first of all, every single child in foster care must be screened for an FASD. And you may ask why. Statistics have shown repeatedly that 80% of kids in the United States foster care have been prenatally exposed to alcohol. 80%. Those are the kids that are bouncing back. Those are the kids that we're doing. It's an injustice. It's beyond criminal. It's an injustice that we can't say this is brain-based. This is not bad behavior. So Minnesota took that, and they said every kid's going to be screened. We're going to have screening for every kid in foster care, no matter what the age. So that is a huge victory, number one. And again, this law was enacted in August of 2020. The second part of that law is that every single parent, caregiver, professional, anyone working with a child in FASD, but particularly it's really geared towards parents and caregivers, must have at least 1 hour of training in FASD. And that's huge. I can tell you that prior to adopting our daughter, who we adopted through really a kinship domestic adoption, my husband and I were actually considering foster care adoption. So we did complete that 30-hour training long before, we in between our adoptions. And I can tell you that in that 30-hour training, there was no mention of fetal alcohol exposure. Drugs was big. Everybody wanted to talk about drugs, but nobody talked about alcohol. And alcohol is more severe, has more of an impact, and has more, not only effect on the brain, but the entire body than any other of the trends. So those things, if you look to Minnesota for just those two pieces, and again, that's not even addressing, people who birth moms or biological moms who may have had a drink and not been aware. That's something I didn't mention as part of FASD. We hope to do is awareness that no amount of alcohol is safe during pregnancy. And that is one of the many reasons why FASD is so prevalent, because it's so undiagnosed. People don't realize, moms don't usually realize they're pregnant until, maybe 6-8 weeks after.
That was going to be one of my questions, is that sometimes it's not always just a neglect thing.
No, it's
pregnant. and I don't care, and I'm just going to drink. Because I've known people who didn't find out they were pregnant until they were 3 months.
And
And
they've
then
already,
you're trying to think back of what you did for these last 3 months. And
Yep.
so that was going to be one of my questions. Like,
And
is it something that only happens during late term pregnancy?
No,
Early term?
anytime, because think about it. Think about the unborn child and alcohol. And the way I explain it is, think about your worst hangover and your worst, your worst night out. I in college, I was, I had, I was not, I'm, not proud. I have had, a few episodes in college where I really got drunk and I was really hungover the next day. Thank God, I don't, I've stepped away from that. But so thinking back to like my memories of like, oh my gosh, I was so drunk and so hungover. Now think about that in an unborn child and how the alcohol crosses the placenta. It's amazing. Excuse me. It's incredible. So I've spoken with many biological moms who just, they didn't realize they were pregnant and they drank. One of whom I interviewed, she was up for it. She was like, yeah, you know what? I remember this incident and I'm sorry. And she went to her GYN and her GYN said, oh, that's okay. No problem. So that's another thing we need to do is educate OBGYNs, doctors, specialists that, and this is on the CDC.gov. This is not only CDC, JAMA, the American Association of Pediatrics. No amount of alcohol is safe during pregnancy. If we can communicate that to everyone, just like you don't eat sushi when you're pregnant, or you don't have, soft cheeses or deli meats, you don't drink any alcohol, no matter what time, because FASD is a spectrum diagnosis. So you're going to have other diagnoses under that FASD umbrella. Things like fetal alcohol syndrome, partial fetal alcohol syndrome, alcohol-related birth defects. Those are examples of diagnoses under that umbrella. So each individual is going to have different, looking diagnoses. So, and that talks, that right there, really reinforces that alcohol affects every unborn child differently because of a lot of factors, not only because of how much or when, but because of prenatal care, because of other, factors involved in the pregnancy. So yeah, I mean, that's huge. So the advice I would give, if you suspect or if you're working, first of all, get educated, become aware. There's plenty of things out there. When my husband and I were first seeking a diagnosis more than 10 years ago, there was very little out there except for this purple book, except for this book. But now there are so many organizations, states really have just done a lot of work, state FASD organizations. We've, gained a lot of allies and people who are trying to help get momentum. So awareness, getting that training or education, ruling it out, because and I heard a dad of a son with an FASD said, and this actually happened. Our son initially had an ADHD diagnosis, and this dad also, his son had an ADHD diagnosis, and he said this perfectly. He said, having a diagnosis of ADHD is accurate, but it's not complete. It's not the definitive diagnosis. It's okay, yeah, you're seeing these symptoms, you're seeing the ADHD, but what caused it? It wasn't a genetic cause. It was prenatal alcohol exposure. So ruling that out, and then finally learning how you can support and accommodate, that individual, that child, because that right there, if you're taking a kid or a teen that's in juvenile detention or in the justice system and they keep coming back, then obviously their brain is not able to make that connection, and you're sending them back out into that environment. So what do? You get the diagnosis, you learn, you get the education, and you make the accommodation. So if they're not able to follow this law or do this, then it's the responsibility of whoever's caring for that child that those accommodations need to be made. That's what we did. When we homeschooled our son, we didn't even have a diagnosis at the time, but we learned that was an accommodation. His brain learns best one-on-one at his own pace. And I would have never thought in a million years that our son had this carpenter in him, but he has this amazing carpenter and woodwork in him. And he has this wonderful teacher that he's been working with for 2 years that it's just like an old-fashioned apprenticeship from hundreds of years ago. He just goes to him and he trains them and they work together, and that's an accommodation. So being able to do that for every individual, really, that would really make a difference. And also shifting the focus on, instead of what that kid or teen or youth cannot do, to what they can do. That's a game changer there.
That definitely is. And I love this conversation. I feel like it is so important and so needed. And just in 30 minutes, I have already learned so much more.
Thank you.
And I think that is so important. Like you said, even with different states requiring even an hour of training would make a that would make a huge difference, because we just know that it's something else to look for. I know working with children, sometimes it can be very difficult when you just don't know what's going on and you're trying all these different things. You've got these different techniques, but if you're not, like you said, that guy said, if it's just part of the problem, it's like saying somebody has, a broken leg or something's wrong with their leg and they can't walk. Well, obviously they can't walk. But is it because they have a leukemia? Is it because they've got bone cancer? Like, it would be important to know, why is it that they're like that? And it doesn't mean that it's doom and gloom and end of the world, but it's hard for us to truly address things that we are not educated in. Because we're just making guesses at this point. And it's like, well, let's put them in this program and see what happens. Let's put them here. And then it just does a disservice to youth. And so that's why I'm so appreciative of this conversation, because I am a huge youth advocate. And so I'm always trying to find the best ways to serve the youth in our system, the youth that I personally know. And so I know we're a little over time, but I have to touch on one more thing. And I wanted to ask you, I know that you mentioned you and your husband, that this is your ministry. And me being a believer, I think that's extremely important that people know that your ministry can look different. It doesn't always mean that you're standing in a church from a pulpit, but your ministry can be the thing that you are passionate about. It can be the thing that God has called you to do in any arena. And I think that is so beautiful. So if you could talk to somebody who is listening and give them hope, somebody who maybe already has that diagnosis, or maybe they just work with children that have it, it's their child. If you could just spread hope for a couple of minutes, I know that that would be
course. Oh my goodness. And I'm so happy to know you're a believer, because faith, God brought us through and he continues to bring us through on this journey. You are not alone, first of all. Secondly, God made your child or your loved one, the world may see as broken, but we see as wonderfully made. And what I've learned as a child, for so many years, I prayed for change in my son. And then when I realized that our son had a disability that was in the brain that was causing what we thought were willful behaviors, but were actually symptoms, I prayed for change in me, because my son then became my teacher. And my husband and I took what we felt like the enemy was using to destroy our family. We took it as, okay, we need to share what we know. We need to take this, what almost broke us, and use it. And it's made us more stronger. If you had told me 5 years ago, or even 4 years ago, when our son was hospitalized, when we finally got that diagnosis, that was my most broken mama moment. He was hospitalized because he also had bipolar disorder in addition to his FASD. And I was just sobbing on the floor, crying. And I realized, and a guest, one of the guests on my podcast used this wonderful kind of steps in ministry. You're the victim first. You feel like you're the victim, but then you become the victor, and you know who makes you the victor is the Lord. And then you become his vessel. So you go from victim to victor to vessel. And that's what we did. And I'm getting goosebumps telling you this because, again, thinking about our son 4 years ago, I would have never imagined that we're doing what we do today. So thinking of that, your child, the child you're working with, the youth you're working with, has gifts inside of them that the Lord has buried. And it's your mission, your ministry, your personal ministry to find those gifts and to stop seeing your child the way the world sees him or her, and to start seeing your child, youth, loved one, anyone you work with, as how Jesus sees him or her. And when I did that, again, this journey is hard. There's many broken times. I can tell you this morning, I was on the floor in our son's room. He's working with his carpentry teacher, and I was on the floor crying and just praying in his room, just praying for the Lord to just continue to bring him in the light, because he's almost 19, and he's still, because his brain is just so hard on him, he still struggles and he still has perseverations and things like that. But I'm so thankful that God taught my husband and I that this brokenness, it's actually a very, very difficult beauty that we are blessed to be on. So you're not alone. I'm talking, whoever is listening to me, you're not alone. And see your loved one, your child, whomever, your student, the way Jesus sees them. Because if you think about in the Bible, Jesus went to those people because those people, the least of these, taught the world the most about him and about God.
Natalie, you are truly amazing. You're
It's
special.
all him.
It's
It is
all
all
God.
him.
Yeah.
It is
But
all
like
him.
you said, you were the willing vessel. And so I think you have your children, they were handpicked specifically for you, because everyone may not have had the same reaction. Everyone may not have said, let me learn about this, become educated so I can truly be not only just what my child needs, but what other people can use as a resource. So you are truly changing lives. And I hope that you hear that often. It is
Thank
very
you.
beautiful. You have inspired me. I would
Oh
love
my
to talk
goodness.
to you again,
We're
get
gonna keep
more
talking.
information.
Whoever's watching this, you and I are gonna keep talking. I feel like this is the Lord saying, y'all need to collaborate.
We definitely do, because I would love for there to be some type of trainings with teachers,
Absolutely.
with people that I work with in youth development. This is so necessary. And I thank God for this connection. I thank God for us being able to talk today. And just thank you again, Natalie. I
Oh
truly
my
have
goodness.
appreciated this.
Thank you so much. And you can go to fasdhope.com to find resources. And also you can hear our podcasts, FASD Hope. We're everywhere, where you can get your podcast. And you can start learning that way too, while you're waiting for these wonderful opportunities. So thank you, Jessica. I feel so
Thank you.
blessed to be
Thank
here
you
today.
too. And I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode of Unmute Your Mic. This has been a very important conversation. I'm going to put all of Natalie's information down below. The different resources she has listed, everything is going to be listed so that you too can just start learning as we try to figure out other ways to be able to get this heard by larger groups of people. I want to thank everybody for listening. Also, you can join us on unmuteyourmic.org. There you will find this episode. You will find the resources from this episode. Natalie, thank you again. It has been a true honor.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate what you're doing too.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Unmute Your Mic. Be sure to tune in next time when Jessica takes her mic off mute as she continues her journey to find stories that inspire and uplift our communities.